The first truck arrived before sunrise. Margaret Hale heard the air brakes before she saw the headlights. She stepped onto the porch just as the dump truck backed toward the rocky corner of her property. The driver climbed out. "You still want them?" Margaret smiled. "I do." He looked over his shoulder toward the trailer. "You know these are rejects." "I know. They're too wide for flooring." "I know. They're cracked." "I noticed." The driver laughed. "Just making sure." Moments later, enormous walnut slabs slid from the trailer onto the ground. Dust rose into the cool morning air. Some pieces measured nearly 12 feet long. Others carried twisted grain, bark edges, knots, and natural splits. The hardwood mill considered them waste. Margaret saw something else entirely. She just didn't know exactly what yet. The arrangement had started 14 years earlier. The Hale farm bordered an old hardwood sawmill famous for processing black walnut harvested throughout the valley. The mill produced premium lumber for cabinet shops and flooring companies. Anything perfectly straight sold immediately. Anything unusual became a problem. Wide slabs, crooked cuts, live-edge boards, pieces with dramatic grain. Furniture factories rarely wanted them. Storage filled quickly. Disposal cost money. One rainy afternoon, the mill owner knocked on Margaret's workshop door. He removed his cap. "Mind if I ask you something?" Margaret looked up from repairing a fence gate. "Sure." He unfolded a rough map. "We've got an unused corner beside your north pasture." She nodded. "I know. We're paying to haul these walnut slabs away." Silence. "So, could we dump them on your property?" Margaret looked toward the rocky hillside. Nothing grew there except brush. It couldn't be farmed. Couldn't be grazed. Couldn't even be mowed. "How much wood?" The mill owner smiled. "More than you'll ever use." Margaret thought for a moment. That's fine. Neither of them realized that simple conversation would quietly change both their businesses. Every Friday, another truck arrived. Walnut. Sometimes cherry. Occasionally white oak. Mostly walnut. Year after year the pile grew. Towering slabs leaned against one another like giant fallen walls. Neighbors joked constantly. One Saturday morning, Dale Harper leaned against the feed store porch. "There goes Margaret." Rick looked up. "The lumber collector?" Dale laughed. "How many trees she's storing now?" Another rancher smiled. "Enough to build another county." Everyone laughed. Margaret simply loaded fencing supplies into her pickup. Dale called out, "So what's the plan?" She smiled. "Tables." The laughter became louder. "Tables. Out of those crooked boards." Margaret nodded. Eventually. Nobody believed her. Not because they disliked her. Because the slabs genuinely looked unusable. Too irregular. Too heavy. Too unpredictable. Samuel Hale never thought that way. When Margaret was 16, he took her into an old walnut grove after a summer storm. A massive walnut tree had fallen across the creek. Its trunk twisted dramatically. Margaret frowned. "That's a shame." Samuel smiled. "No." She looked confused. "It'll never make straight lumber." He rested one hand on the bark. "Exactly." Silence. "So, the most beautiful wood rarely grows perfectly straight." Years later, standing beside mountains of rejected walnut, Margaret finally understood. After Samuel passed away, she inherited more than the farm. She inherited notebooks. Dozens of them. Some described fencing. Others recorded weather. One notebook fascinated her. Inside were hand-drawn sketches of dining tables, benches, coffee tables, kitchen islands. Everything built around natural wood shakes rather than perfect boards. One sentence appeared again and again. "Never force the tree to become something it wasn't." Margaret read that notebook hundreds of times. The slab pile continued growing. One winter evening, Nathan walked into the equipment shed. Margaret sat surrounded by woodworking books, furniture magazines, joinery diagrams. Wood samples covered the bench. Nathan smiled. "You're doing it again." She looked up. "What?" "The books." Silence. "The books. They always mean you're planning something expensive." Margaret laughed. "Probably." Nathan picked up one walnut slab. Dark chocolate grain shimmered beneath years of weathered dust. "You know." He brushed away loose bark. "This is beautiful." Margaret nodded. "The mill throws it away." Nathan looked toward the enormous pile outside. "They're crazy." Margaret smiled. "I hope they stay that way." The following spring she enrolled in weekend woodworking classes nearly 80 miles away. Most students built cabinets. Margaret didn't. She asked different questions. How do live edges move? How do you stabilize natural cracks? How do you flatten giant slabs? The instructor noticed immediately. "You planning custom furniture?" Margaret smiled. "Maybe." For almost 2 years she practiced. Cutting, planing, sanding, finishing, making mistakes. Lots of mistakes. The first dining table wobbled. The second cracked. The third developed warped legs. Nathan quietly stored each failure in the barn. Keeping souvenirs? Margaret smiled. Lessons. By the 15th table something changed. Everything fit naturally. The grain flowed uninterrupted. The live edges remained untouched. The table looked less manufactured than discovered. Exactly the way Samuel's sketches suggested. One autumn the county hosted its annual artisan market. Margaret rented the smallest booth available. One walnut dining table. 2 benches. A coffee table. Nothing else. Visitors stopped constantly. They touched the silky finish. Ran their hands across the natural bark edges. Asked where she found such unusual walnut. Margaret always answered honestly. The sawmill froze it away. Most people laughed, assuming she joked. By closing time she had sold nothing. Nathan helped load everything into the trailer. They liked it. Margaret sighed. They didn't buy it. Nathan smiled. They'll remember it. A month later a landscape architect called. He had photographed Margaret's booth. One client wanted a dining table unlike anything sold in furniture stores. Could Margaret build it? She hesitated, then answered, yes. The project took 7 weeks. One enormous walnut slab. Steel legs. Natural finish. Nothing artificial. When installation day arrived, the homeowners stood silently around the completed table. One finally whispered, "It feels alive." Their interior designer happened to photograph the room. Those photographs eventually reached a regional architecture magazine. Instead of focusing on the house, the editor focused on the table, specifically its story. Rejected walnut. Farm workshop. Handcrafted furniture. The article generated unexpected attention. Orders slowly increased. Then doubled again. One afternoon the hardwood mill owner stopped beside Margaret's workshop. Inside, craftsmen carefully sanded another massive walnut slab. Outside, finished tables waited for shipment. He looked toward the towering pile of rejected lumber. Then back toward the workshop. You know? Margaret smiled. What? We've been paying to dump your inventory for 14 years. She laughed softly. It certainly looks that way. A week later, a luxury interior designer from another state drove onto the farm. She spent nearly 3 hours studying Margaret's furniture, then walked outside to the enormous slab pile. She rested one hand on a weathered walnut slab. Finally she smiled. I've got a question. Margaret folded her arms. Go ahead. The designer looked across the endless rows of stacked walnut. Have you ever considered building furniture for homes outside this state? The designer's question lingered long after she drove away. Have you ever considered building furniture for homes outside this state? Margaret hadn't. Her workshop already stayed busy enough. Every completed table sold before the finish had fully cured. Architects called. Designers called. Homeowners waited patiently. Samuel always believed growth should never outrun craftsmanship. Still, the opportunity refused to leave her thoughts. Nathan noticed. One evening he walked into the workshop carrying invoices. Margaret sat studying freight maps. You're doing it again. She looked up. What? The maps. Silence. The maps. Nathan smiled. They usually mean another big idea. Margaret laughed softly. They usually do. 3 months later she accepted the designer's invitation. Not to open a showroom. Not to build a factory. Simply to display 5 handcrafted walnut pieces at a luxury home design exhibition in North Carolina. Each piece required careful planning. The dining tables couldn't simply be loaded onto a truck. Every leg, every steel bracket, every tabletop received custom crates built inside the workshop. Nathan inspected the final shipment. If these survive the drive, he smiled. Everything else will. The exhibition hall overwhelmed Margaret. Imported Italian furniture, luxury lighting, designer kitchens, marble from around the world, professional marketing teams. Her display looked simple. One enormous live-edge walnut dining table, a matching bench, coffee tables, console tables. Nothing flashy, only wood. Visitors stopped almost immediately. Not because the furniture shouted for attention, because it didn't. One woman slowly ran her fingertips across the natural live edge. You left the bark line. Margaret nodded. The tree already designed it. The woman smiled. I've never heard anyone say that. Another visitor studied the swirling walnut grain. Where did this wood come from? Margaret answered honestly. The sawmill rejected it. The visitor laughed. No. Yes. You mean this wasn't milled for furniture? It was hauled away as waste. He stared silently at the table. then quietly whispered, "That's unbelievable." By the end of the exhibition, every piece had sold. But that wasn't the biggest surprise. Architects filled Margaret's appointment calendar. Luxury mountain homes, lakeside retreats, corporate boardrooms, restaurants, boutique hotels. Everything wanted one thing: furniture nobody else owned. The waiting list stretched beyond a year. Back at the farm, the workshop changed carefully. Not dramatically. Margaret refused to become a mass producer. Instead, she trained local craftspeople, young cabinet makers, retired carpenters, talented welders, people who cared about details. The old hay barn became a finishing room. The machine shed transformed into a climate-controlled drying building. The empty grain warehouse became a fabrication shop. Every Friday, the sawmill trucks still arrived. Only now the drivers smiled while unloading. One morning, the mill owner climbed out before tipping the trailer. He looked across the expanded workshop. Forklifts moved giant walnut slabs. Employees sanded tables. Delivery trucks prepared for cross-country shipments. He laughed. "You know?" Margaret smiled. "What?" "Our accounting department changed the paperwork." She looked curious. "How?" "We stopped calling these disposal slabs." He pointed toward the trailer. "Now they're premium inventory." Margaret laughed. "I like that better." A year later, a nationally respected interior design magazine published a feature. The headline covered 2 pages. "The farm that turned rejected walnut into heirlooms." Readers loved the story. The photographs captured dramatic contrasts. One page showed rough walnut slabs stacked beside the pasture. The next revealed elegant dining tables inside luxury homes overlooking oceans, mountains, and vineyards. Orders increased again. Nathan walked into the office holding another stack of contracts. "We've got another problem." Margaret smiled. "What?" "We're booked 18 months out." She laughed. "I suppose that's a good problem." "It is." Silence. "But it's still a problem." Instead of expanding endlessly, Margaret created something different. Every table received a numbered brass plate beneath the surface. Each certificate identified the original slab, the approximate age of the walnut tree, the county where it grew, the year the sawmill rejected it. Customers loved knowing the story behind their furniture. One homeowner wrote, "Dinner conversations always begin with the table." Margaret smiled when she read the letter. Samuel would have liked that. The greatest surprise came from the Hardwood mill itself. The company invited Margaret to speak during its annual employee meeting. Sawmill workers filled the warehouse. Log buyers, machine operators, sawyers, truck drivers. Everyone attended. The mill owner introduced Margaret with a smile. "For years." He paused. "We thought we were giving away scrap." Laughter filled the room. He continued. "Turns out we were delivering the finest furniture wood we had." The employees applauded. Several drivers laughed because they remembered hauling those slabs for years. One admitted, "I thought she'd burn them." Margaret smiled. So did most people. After the meeting, the sawmill officially changed its grading system. Instead of separating unusual slabs as waste, workers carefully stacked exceptional live-edge pieces, still rejected for commercial lumber, but no longer treated as worthless. The partnership benefited everyone. The mill reduced disposal costs. Margaret gained a reliable inventory. Local loggers received better value for unusual trees. Waste almost disappeared. One autumn afternoon, Dale Harper visited the workshop. He slowly walked between rows of finished furniture. Massive walnut conference tables, kitchen islands, dining tables, console pieces. Everything handcrafted. Everything unique. He stopped beside one spectacular 12-foot slab. Dark walnut grain flowed like water across its polished surface. Dale shook his head. "No." Margaret smiled. "Morning." He rested both hands on the tabletop. "I remember laughing." "I remember too." He looked toward the old slab pile still stacked behind the pasture. "I thought those crooked boards were junk." "They looked that way." Silence. "They weren't." "No." Long pause. "They were your inventory." Margaret smiled. "They always were." Several months later, a luxury hospitality company commissioned furniture for 12 boutique lodges. The project became the workshop's largest contract ever. Dozens of local craftspeople worked together. Every dining table matched naturally. Yet no two looked identical. Guests immediately noticed. Travel magazines featured the lodges. Many articles mentioned the furniture before describing the buildings. One editor wrote, "The tables feel less like furniture and more like preserved pieces of the forest." Margaret quietly clipped the article, then placed it inside Samuel's old notebook. Exactly where he would have kept it. One evening Nathan stood beside Margaret, overlooking the pasture. The setting sun illuminated rows of walnut slabs, still waiting patiently. Beyond them stood the expanded workshops. Employees locked the doors before heading home. Delivery trucks prepared for morning departures. Nathan folded his arms. "You know what still bothers me?" Margaret smiled. "What?" They laughed every Friday. "Yes. For 14 years. I know." They couldn't see it. Margaret walked toward one weathered walnut slab, delivered only days earlier. She brushed away years of dusty saw marks, then wiped a little mineral oil across the grain. Instantly, the wood transformed. Deep chocolate browns, golden ribbons, rich swirling figure. The hidden beauty seemed almost impossible to believe. Nathan smiled. "Grandpa would have loved that." Margaret nodded. "He already did." She rested one hand gently on the slab. "You remember what Samuel always said?" Nathan looked over. "What?" "Don't force the tree to become something it wasn't." The evening breeze moved quietly across the farm. For 14 years, trucks had backed into one forgotten corner of Margaret Hale's property and unloaded walnut slabs nobody wanted. The mill saw disposal costs. Neighbors saw firewood. Most people saw crooked boards too awkward to use. Margaret saw stories trapped inside every piece of wood. She never tried to erase the knots. She never cut away the live edges. She simply revealed the beauty that had always been there. By the time her furniture filled luxury homes across the country, people called her an extraordinary craftswoman. Margaret disagreed. She believed the trees had done the extraordinary work decades before. She had simply refused to throw them away. And in the end, the greatest thing the sawmill ever delivered was in walnut. It was the opportunity hidden inside every slab that everyone else believed was only worth dumping behind a pasture.